Welcome to the Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission's presentation on EDI Claims 3.1. We have prepared this information session for claim administrators, insurance carriers, third-party administrators, self-insured employers, and of course our EDI service providers. This session is to provide information concerning our transition from EDI Release 3.0 to 3.1. My name is Stephanie Sweeney, and I'm the EDI Quality Assurance Manager for the Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission. I have been with the Commission for over 24 years, and I have been with the Commission's EDI department since its inception in 2008. I am pleased to be here today to present to you information concerning our transition to EDI Release 3.1. To start, I would like to cover what you should do if you have any questions after you have reviewed this presentation. If you do in fact have any questions after reviewing the presentation, please send an email to the Commission's EDI support team at edi.support@workcomp.virginia.gov. Please be sure to put in the subject line 3.1 questions from info session to be sure that we can prioritize your email and respond in a timely fashion. During this session, we will go over the trading partner registration process, discuss in detail the transition from Release 3 to 3.1, go over the requirements for trading partner and EDI vendor testing. We will go over the 4 different tables that outline our 3.1 requirements, and then we will also provide additional detail on how you may obtain answers to any questions you have after the presentation. As I am sure many of you are aware, Virginia has been receiving EDI Release 3.0 since October of 2008. Given this, and the fact that the majority of our customers are already familiar with how the tables are outlined and what information can be found in each one, we are not going to focus this training on what is in each of the 3.1 tables. Instead, we are going to use this information session to focus on the differences between 3.1 and what we are currently receiving in Release 3.0. We will also go over where you can find important information and resources as you transition to Release 3.1. Let's first talk about the resources available from the IA-IABC. Information on the IA-IABC EDI claims standards can be found online on the IA-IABC website as shown here as iaiabc.org. The IA-IABC website also provides information such as how to become a member, resources to support the standard, events such as the annual forum and convention, and additional educational information. In this example, to access the Claims 3.1 standard, select the EDI Standards menu and then select EDI Claims from the drop-down. From here, you will be taken to the EDI Claims Standards page, where there is a lot of information regarding the EDI Claims standard. Once you are on the EDI Claims Standards page, you will see a map of the state implementations. Scrolling down below the map, you will find the EDI Claims Release 3.1 standard documents. By clicking the green bar, you can acquire the latest version of the EDI Claims 3.1 implementation guide. This guide is essential for understanding 3.1 and contains the record layouts, technical and business process rules, and the data dictionary that defines every data element in Release 3.1. A separate link will allow you to download the business scenarios. Next, we are going to talk about Virginia's EDI Claims website. In addition to the IA-IABC Release 3.1 Implementation Guide and other available resources on their website, you will also want to take a look and potentially bookmark the 2 Virginia-specific websites. The first one we're going to go over is our vendor's Virginia-specific website. Here on the home page, you will find contact information, EDI requirement information, our specific implementation guide, implementation information, training information, frequently asked questions, website links, also a list of potential EDI vendors, and finally, the trading partner profile, which includes registration and further instructions. Let's walk through a few examples of the information that you will find on our Vendors Virginia specific website. To get help with Virginia's EDI program, please click on Contact Us for help. For Virginia's FROI and SHORE requirements, click on EDI Requirements and Implementation Guide. The EDI Requirements is where you will find all of Virginia's requirement tables, which are essential for a successful implementation. The implementation information link is important information such as processing schedules, testing requirements, and transition timelines. Other links include trading information, FAQs, web links to access related websites, and EDI vendors. On the prior slide, we talked about two sections that we feel needed more information. The first one is EDI requirements. After clicking on the EDI requirements link, the Virginia Claims Requirements page is displayed. Virginia's event table, element requirement table, and edit matrix are provided and include a description of each table. To access and download the specific requirement table in Excel format, click on the blue highlighted table name. You want to be sure to download these documents to use as a tool for Virginia's requirements. The event table identifies what maintenance type codes are due and the circumstances under which they should be sent, as well as the time frames for sending the information. The element requirement table lists the individual data elements for each FROI and SHORE report type and identifies if they are required, and if so, under what conditions. The edit matrix provides information on the valid values and edits that will be applied based on the population of the data element. This is the document you will use to determine why you received a rejection. Every data element is numbered, and every error code is also numbered to correspond with the results you receive on the acknowledgement. The FROI sequencing table and the SHORE sequencing table provide information regarding in what sequence the MTCs are expected to be sent in Virginia and any sequencing exceptions. We will provide more information on these documents further on in the training. The next link or tab that we wish to discuss is the Implementation Guide. After clicking on the Implementation Guide link, the Virginia Release 3.1 Implementation Guide link is displayed. This guide provides additional information for Virginia's EDI reporting in addition to all of the requirement tables. Next is the link or tab titled Implementation Info. By clicking on the Implementation Information page, you will find various documents to assist with the implementation. For example, you can see here Virginia's Master Sender ID that provides Virginia's master FIN that should be used when sending the EDI Claims Release 3.1 data and returned as part of the acknowledgement file. Other documents include the processing schedule, the test plan, and testing feedback request list, and the implementation schedule. Next, we will cover the second website where you can find all of Virginia's specific EDI requirements. And this is the Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission's website. Once going to the website, www.workcomp.virginia.gov, you can scroll down on the left-hand side until you find a link for the EDI Quality Assurance Department. Once on this page, you will be able to find links to documents related to the EDI 3.1 implementation. You will find EDI specific FAQs, all of the EDI newsletters, as well as the EDI department's vision and mission statement, additional resources related to the EDI program, all of the training aids we have put together to assist our customers with the filing of their EDI transaction, as well as a list of potential EDI vendors. If you click on the 3.1 Implementation Guide link, it will pull up the page that you see here on your screen. This page includes the 4 tables that outline all of our requirements. It also includes the transition timeline, the test plan, including the test feedback request, as well as the PDF version of our 3.1 implementation guide. We will now move on to Virginia's trading partner registration process. If you are a claim administrator and are currently sending Release 3 transactions to Virginia, you are already a registered trading partner and do not need to re-register for Release 3.1. If you need to make any changes to any of your trading partner profile information, or if you will be filing EDI in Virginia for the first time beginning with Release 3.1, then you need to update or create an EDI trading partner profile registration. Please follow the trading partner registration link on Virginia's homepage and complete and submit the profile. Let's now discuss Virginia's Release 3.1 implementation timeline from the beginning to the future. Virginia is currently receiving electronic reporting of workers' compensation first reports of injury and subsequent reports of injury via Release 3.0. Starting on January 16, 2025, Virginia will no longer accept Release 3 transactions and will require first reports of injury and subsequent reports of injury to be reported via the Release 3.1 format. Release 3.1 electronic reporting will be required for all trading partners, insurers, self-insured self-administered employers, and claim administrators. Third-party administrators will be reporting for their insurer and self-insured employer clients. The reporting is mandatory for Virginia effective January 16, 2025. A common question we receive is when should you stop sending Release 3.0 transactions and start sending Release 3.1? Well, please ensure that the last reportable Release 3 EDI transaction is sent to and accepted by Virginia no later than Wednesday, January 15, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Any Release 3 report not received and accepted by 11:59 on Wednesday, January 15th must be submitted to Virginia per the Release 3.1 event table pursuant to our mandate date of January 16, 2025. Effective January 16, 2025, electronic reporting via Release 3.1 for all trading partners will begin, and anything submitted according to the Release 3.0 standard will be rejected. Let's take a moment to review Virginia's Claims 3.1 implementation timeline at a high level. Trading partner and EDI vendor testing began on April 30th, 2024. Release 3.1 testing is set to be completed by December 9th, 2024. The last submission of Release 3.0 must be received by Virginia no later than Wednesday, January 15th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mandatory Release 3.1 FROI and SHROI reporting will begin on Thursday, January 16th, 2025. And after a review and transition period, Release 3.1 acknowledgments will be returned no later than January 24th, 2025. Moving on, we will now discuss the transition from Release 3.0 to 3.1. Prior to submitting any FROI or SHROI in Release 3.1, a FROI UR update report is due on any non-minor claim that is open and previously reported in Release 3 for which the date the claim administrator had knowledge of the injury is prior to January 16, 2025. The FROI UR is intended to match a claim previously reported in Release 3 and to, quote, set the picture for 3.1 reporting. Following the FROI UR, a SHROI UR or the applicable SHROI per sequencing should be reported. If benefits or other benefits were reported in Release 3, a SHROI UR will be expected and the appropriate benefit or other benefit previously paid should be present on the SHROI UR. All of this information is communicated on the event table, which we will discuss later in this presentation. When transitioning from Release 3 to 3.1, we have what we call legacy claims. In Virginia, there are two types of legacy claims. One, those claims that were required and properly filed, and two, those claims that were required but not properly filed. Legacy claims that were required and properly filed with Virginia are claims that you would have previously reported to Virginia in Release 3 by the January 15th, 2025 cutoff time. In those cases, Virginia would have accepted these reports if they passed their edits and assigned and provided you with a jurisdiction claim number for that claim. The other legacy claim scenario is for claims that were required but were not properly filed in Virginia. For these claims, the date the claim administrator had knowledge of the injury will be prior to January 16, 2025, but these claims would not have been properly reported in Release 3.0 to Virginia by our cutoff time, and no JCN would have been assigned. When transitioning from Release 3 to 3.1, we also need to discuss new claims reporting. New claims are claims that have never been reported to Virginia using the EDI Release 3 standard. To understand what new claims should be reported, you should review the FROI event table, which will help you determine which event would cause you to report the claim to Virginia. Then, following the FROI report, review the SHROI event table to determine what SHROI reports should be sent to Virginia after the FROI. Also review the sequencing table to determine which MTCs are allowed to follow prior MTCs. It is important to note that Virginia has changed some of our Release 3 MTC requirements, and there are new MTCs in Release 3.1. We will discuss this in more detail later in this training. Let's take some time to discuss trading partner and EDI vendor testing. Trading partner and EDI vendor testing began for Virginia on April 30th, 2024. Testing review and approval for Virginia will be handled by Virginia's EDI claims vendor, Verisk. For trading partners who are currently or are planning to file EDI claims Release 3.1 FROI SHROI reports through an EDI vendor, the vendor will be required to complete the test plan on behalf of their clients. Virginia will specify which trading partner's claims should be used for testing by the vendor. Once the vendor is approved for production, the trading partners using that vendor will also be approved. We also have some trading partners that do not use a vendor. These trading partners will be required to complete the test plan on their own behalf. If you are using the Virginia Jurisdiction Web Entry System, then you are not required to test. In order to move to production with Virginia for Release 3.1 reporting, Virginia needs to receive test data from you to ensure that your data will be formatted properly and accurately. There are basically two documents used to assist with the testing: the Virginia Test Requirements and the Testing Feedback Request List. These documents can be found on both of the websites that we discussed earlier. The one shown on the screen is our vendor's Virginia-specific website, in which you can find these documents on the Implementation Information page. The Virginia Test Requirements provide you with the minimum FROI and SHROI test requirements. The Virginia EDI Testing Feedback Request List is where you log your test cases and then send it to Virginia to request testing review and approval of the minimum transactions listed. Although there is a minimum group of transactions required for production approval, Virginia does expect all required trading partners to submit test data that exceeds those transactions identified in the test requirements document. Trading partner and EDI vendors must complete testing and receive production approval by December 9th, 2024. The VWC testing requirements are broken down into these 5 stages. Number 1, EDI Trading Partner Profile Electronic Registration. Number 2, Pre-Test and Technical Capability Test. 3, Business Content Test for FROIs. 4, Business Content Test for SHROIs. And 5, Virginia Test Completion for FROIs and SHROIs. Let's take a moment to walk through each one. To begin production reporting, all 5 test stages must be completed. For Stage 1, you must be a registered trading partner in Virginia. However, if you are submitting Release 3 transactions currently, then you are already registered. In Stage 2, we need for you to complete the pretest and technical capability test to ensure that the file structure is valid per the IABC EDI Release 3.1 standards, as the format for EDI Release 3.1 is different from Release 3.0. This portion of the test will also ensure that the header record is populated with the correct sender ID per the trading partner registration, the receiver ID, and other validations. Stage 3, Virginia's Business Content Test for FROIs. For this test, Virginia requires at a minimum the FROI MTCs 00 original, 01 cancellation, 02 change, 04 denial, and UR update report to be tested in accordance with Virginia's 3.1 test plan. Please note that part of the FROI test will include a requirement to submit at least 5 FROI URs for an existing legacy claim filed using dates of injury prior to January 1st, 2024. As a suggestion, when you are considering the FROI reports that will be tested, it is recommended that you also review the Stage 4 SROI testing that comes later on so that you can determine if additional FROI test reports are needed to establish claims in order to successfully complete your SROI testing. Upon completion of test FROI batches 1 and 2, the trading partner and/or their vendor should request testing approval by completing and submitting the Virginia EDI Testing Feedback Request List, Release 3.1. The feedback request form will list all of the completed FROI test claims required by Virginia's test plan and should be sent to Virginia's EDI email, VWC-EDI@verisk.com. Virginia will then notify the trading partner by email if the trading partner has passed its FROI testing and is approved to proceed with SROI testing. Stage 4 is the business content test for SROIs and requires at a minimum the SROI MTCs shown here on the slide to be tested in accordance with the Virginia 3.1 test plan. Please note that part of the SROI test will include a requirement to submit at least 5 SROI URs with a date of injury prior to January 1st, 2024. As I mentioned in a prior slide, the SROI testing builds on the accepted FROIs, so please make sure that you have an adequate number of FROIs reported in Stage 3 to meet the SROI testing requirements in Stage 4. For SROI reporting, please pay special attention to sequencing. The last and final stage of testing is Stage 5, test completion. Upon completion of the SROI minimum test transactions, the trading partner and/or their vendor must request testing review and approval from Virginia by submitting the Virginia EDI Testing Feedback Request List 3.1 to Virginia's EDI email. After completing stages 1 through 4, which include SROI testing, Stage 5 is requesting and being approved for SROIs, which will also mean you are approved for production for both FROI and SROI reporting effective January 16, 2025. It is important to note that both FROI and SROI testing must be completed by December 9, 2024. One thing that you will need to do before submitting your first 3.1 transaction on January 16, 2025 is to change the test production indicator on the header record from T for test to P for production to indicate that records contained in the file are production data. Now that we've finished discussing the test plan, let's move on to the fun stuff. Virginia's EDI 3.1 requirements. All trading partners should have an understanding of the changes in the EDI Release 3.1 format and Virginia's requirements. The overview contained in the next several sections will provide you with information such as the event table, what EDI reports should be filed and when, the element requirement table, what data is needed on the EDI reports, the edit matrix, what edits will be applied to the EDI data, and sequencing, what sequencing edits will be applied to each EDI MTC. The first set of requirements we will go over will be Virginia's event table. If you are an existing trading partner filing in Release 3, you should be familiar with the event table. This table indicates what MTCs should be filed and when. The event table contains 5 worksheets. The IA-IABC Event Table Changelog. This is a document that contains all of the changes made by the IA-IABC as it relates to the event table. The Virginia Event Table Changelog, where we will log any changes to our event table from one version to another. The FROI Event Table, the SROI Event Table, and the SROI Periodic Event Table. Together, these 5 worksheets provide the information needed to understand some of Virginia's EDI reporting requirements. Let's take a look at an example. What you see on the screen is an example of the event table for the MTC00, the FROI original report. The event table tells you the MTC, its description, and also that it is required from the Release 3.1 mandate date of January 16, 2025. It also identifies the Virginia FROI report trigger criteria, which indicates the circumstances under which a FROI report should be sent. You will also be able to see when the MTC should be triggered and when the report is due. If it is required by Virginia statute or rules, they will be listed in the next column, along with what paper forms may be due and which party should also receive a copy of that paper form. Let's take a couple minutes to discuss the report trigger in more detail. The event table tells you the details of the report trigger value, which indicates the circumstances under which a FROI or SROI report should be sent, and sometimes when it does not need to be sent. The MTC CA is a good example of this. A CA MTC should be sent when the claim administrator has identified that the gross weekly amount for this benefit type has changed due to the claimant's earnings while on temporary partial benefits. A CA transaction should not be sent for the beginning or change of a benefit adjustment or any other CA reason other than for a change due to the payment of temporary partial benefits, as previously stated. Virginia will pick up the benefit adjustments on the next applicable SROI event. As mentioned, this is a good example of how the report trigger value will show you situations when a transaction may and also may not be due. There are a few MTC changes that you will see with Release 3.1 for Virginia's event table. Specifically, we redefine the FROI and SROI MTC UR. The UR transaction will no longer be used to report minor injuries to the state of Virginia. Beginning with Release 3.1, the UR transaction will solely be used to transition claims from Release 3 to 3.1. We also added new MTCs with Release 3.1. We added the narrative, the NT, the SX, which is the full suspension and must be submitted with the suspension reason code for full, the PX, which is the partial suspension and must be submitted with the suspension reason code for partial, the SROI 02 change, the AB to add a concurrent benefit type, the AC, which is an acquisition indemnity ceased, that will be used for a new claim administrator to report that benefits were suspended by the prior claim administrator but never reported as such, and then the CA to report a change in benefit amount. In addition to the changes noted in the prior slide, there are a few MTCs that we will no longer accept in Release 3.1. Those include the FROI UR upon request, grandfathered. The FROI UR in Release 3.0, as I mentioned, was used to report minor injuries to the state of Virginia. We will no longer use the FROI UR for this purpose in Release 3.1, as it will be used to transition JCNs from Release 3 to 3.1. For SROIs, we remove the S1 through S9, as they were now replaced by the SX transaction and a suspension reason code for full. The same is true for partial suspensions, the P1 through P9. They have been replaced with the MTC PX and suspension reason code for partial. And then also the SROI UR upon request grandfathered. In Release 3, we allow the SROI UR to come in periodically to update claims and bring us the current snapshot or current picture of that claim. In Release 3.1, we will no longer use the UR for that purpose. It will simply be used to transition claims with SROI payments from Release 3 to 3.1. The next set of requirements we will go over will be Virginia's specific element requirement table. So, what data is needed on the EDI reports? Well, I'm sure most of you already know the answer to that question, but in case you didn't, the element requirement table lists every data element on both the FROI and SROI MTCs. Virginia has identified if a data element is required on each specific MTC transaction with a specific requirement code on the table. If a data element is conditionally required, which would be listed as MC, the FROI and SROI conditions tab further clarifies under what conditions that data element is required. The element requirement table is a lengthy document that contains 11 worksheets in total. The first two are your change logs, the IA-IABC change log, and the Virginia specific change log. The next three are for your FROIs, which is the FROI element requirements table, the FROI O2 exceptions table, and the FROI conditional requirements table. In between the FROI and the SROI tables, you have the new legacy claim definitions worksheet. After that, you have your three SROI specific requirement tables, which consist of the SROI element requirements table, the SROI O2 exceptions table, and the SROI conditional requirements table. After that, you have two SROI related tables, and those are the event benefit segment requirements and the event benefit conditional requirements table. There is one worksheet that was not mentioned in the prior slide for the element requirement table, and this is the very first worksheet. This worksheet is called the Instructions tab. This tab provides a legend that defines the color and codes in each requirement cell and the application acknowledgement code results. This is a sample of one of the tables in the Instructions tab. It also defines the colors and reportable change codes in the O2 columns, which is new for Release 3.1. This will be discussed in more detail later in this presentation. Another new change you will see on the element requirement table is that part of body injured code is now in a variable segment for Release 3.1. Virginia will be using the new part of body injured variable segment and the new data elements. Along with part of body injured code, Virginia is conditionally requiring the part of body injured location code and part of body injured fingers, toes location code. The conditions are defined under the FROI Conditions tab. Please consult the IA-IABC Release 3.1 Implementation Guide for a list of the new codes and definitions. As you are aware, if the requirement code equals MC, which stands for mandatory conditional, then you must look at the Conditions tab to determine under which condition this data element would be required. You can see an example of an MC data element in the picture on your screen. In this example, it is the part of body injured location code and part of body injured fingers, toes location code that are conditionally required. This is an example of the Conditions tab in the Element Requirement table. These are the conditions under which these two data elements, part of body injured location code and part of body injured fingers, toes location code, are conditionally required. It is important to always refer to the appropriate FROI, SROI, or Event Benefits Conditions tab to know when you are required to report conditionally required data elements for a particular MTC. Another new change for Release 3.1 is a new Employee ID type qualifier. Virginia has chosen to accept the new Employee ID T, which stands for Employee Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. The next change coming with Release 3.1 is a new Cancel Elements variable segment. Virginia will be using the new Cancel Elements variable segment for MTC 01, which stands for Cancel Entire Claim, and also the new associated data elements. Those data elements include the cancel reason code, jurisdiction claim number related, and the cancel reason narrative. Please consult the IABC Release 3.1 Implementation Guide for a list of all of the new codes as well as their definitions. Next, we'll discuss some changes on the SROI for Release 3.1, starting with changes to return to work information. Some of these DNs are also available on a FROI. In Release 3, you had the following: DN 0068, initial return to work date, and DN 0072, latest return to work status date. And to go with those dates, you have one set of what we refer to as the return to work qualifiers. You send the qualifiers to match the most recent return to work date reported. Those qualifiers are DN 0189, return to work type code, DN 0224, physical restrictions indicator, and DN 0228, return to work with the same employer indicator. In Release 3.1, you will still have initial return to work date and latest return to work status date. However, you now have new DNs for the return to work qualifiers, and there is a set that goes with the initial return to work and a different set that goes with the latest return to work. You will need to determine how to convert these properly when transitioning to Release 3.1. Virginia will no longer accept the physical restrictions and same employer indicators when moving to 3.1. The new codes are DN 403, initial return to work type code, DN 404, initial return to work physical restrictions indicator, DN 405, initial return to work with same employer indicator, DN 406, latest return to work type code, DN 407, latest return to work physical restrictions indicator, and DN 408, latest return to work with same employer indicator. Please remember the initial and the latest return to work date should never equal each other. The next SROI change that we will discuss is for suspensions. In Release 3, you have multiple suspension MTCs, codes S1 through SJ. That is also true for partial suspension MTCs. In Release 3.1, the MTCs were combined into one MTC for each, SX for full suspension and PX for partial suspension. And the former Release 3 MTC codes were moved to a new DN. Those new DNs are DN 418 for suspension reason code full and DN 419 suspension reason code partial. Please refer to the Release 3.1 Implementation Guide Data Dictionary for definitions and data population rules for these new DNs. The permanent impairment segment of the SROI has changed as follows. In Release 3, DN 0083 Permanent Impairment Body Part Code and DN 0084 Permanent Impairment Percentage were in a variable segment by themselves in the upper A49 record of the SROI. In Release 3.1, DN 0083 and DN 0084 were moved to a variable segment in the bottom of the R22 record of the SROI, and DN 0432 Permanent Impairment Body Part Location Code was added. Here is a visual of the element requirement table showing the permanent impairment variable segment. Please refer to the Release 3.1 Implementation Guide Data Dictionary for the definition and data population rules for these data elements. Also, review the Schroy Conditions tab to determine the conditions under which these data elements are required. There has also been some changes regarding dependent payee relationship information with Release 3.1. In Release 3, DN0097, Dependent Payee Relationship Code, was in a variable segment by itself. In Release 3.1, DN0097 will remain in a variable segment but move to a different section of the Schroy transaction and will now include the following new data elements: DN0425, dependent first name; DN0426, dependent last name; DN0427, dependent date of birth; DN0428, dependent gender code; and DN0429, dependent extent of dependency. Please note, in Virginia, we will accept DN425, 426, and 427, but we will not accept DN428 and 429. There is another new variable segment coming with Release 3.1, and that is the Narrative for Claim segment. It is only permitted on the MTC NT, which is new for Release 3.1, and it is a free-form text narrative field used by a claim administrator to provide any further explanation needed on a claim. Virginia will accept the new MTC NT, and we will provide details soon on how we see this MTC and the new data element being used. Please refer to the Release 3.1 Implementation Guide Data Dictionary for the definition of the MTC-NT and the new data element Narrative for Claim. Last year, the IABC amended the Event Benefit Segment Conditions tab for DN0192 Benefit Payment Issue Date to add the ability to collect benefit payment issue date on an MTC CA and CB, in addition to the already allowed MTC IP, AP, PY, RB, and SX. Virginia would like the benefit payment issue date reported for all of these MTCs. The biggest change for Release 3.1 is the MTC02 change process. One of the primary reasons for creating Release 3.1 was to improve the O2 change process. In Release 3, a state could just enter a Y in the O2 column if they wanted to know if a DN has changed. Most jurisdictions like to know about the adding or removal of a DN, but did not want to know every time a DN was updated in the claim administrator system, especially financial information, unless it was initially reported wrong and is now being changed. A claim administrator system cannot determine if a change is being made because the data was wrong or the data was just being updated. This resulted in numerous O2s being triggered to the state, and the state was unable to tell specifically which data was being changed on the transaction. Release 3.1 has now developed a specific O2 change variable segment on the FROI and Schroy to help resolve this issue. It is important to note that Virginia will only look at the change segment to update their system. Any changes made and not included in the change segment on an O2 will not be acknowledged and updated in our system. Virginia did not accept the Schroy O2 in Release 3, but we will accept it in Release 3.1. While the financial issues noted above did not apply to us, we wanted to cover all of the changes coming in Release 3.1 as it does relate to the new O2 process. The new change variable segment was created on both the FROI and Schroy O2, and if you are currently sending data to another Release 3.1 state, you are already familiar with this process. The segment contains new data elements that were created to identify the data element or variable segment that is being changed, and also the reason for the change. The two new data elements are DN412, change data element segment number, and DN0413, change reason code. The new change reason codes are A for add, U for update, R for remove, and D for delete. Please refer to the Release 3.1 Element Requirement Table instructions, the Implementation Guide, and Data Dictionary for the data population rules for these DNs. Also, please thoroughly review the O2 change processing rules in Section 4 of the IA-IABC's Implementation Guide. These new change reason codes now have their own columns in a special O2 set of columns on the FROI and SROI element requirement table. This special O2 section also includes an O2 requirement code column. For the new MTC O2 change process, the IA-IABC has created reportable change codes for a jurisdiction to use to identify if an add, update, remove, or delete will be accepted. Some of these codes also identify which report, a FROI or a SROI, should be used to report the change. The legend of these codes is found in the Instructions tab at the front of the element requirement table. Let's take a few minutes to go over some of these reportable change codes. We'll start with B, which stands for restricted. It means that the IA-IABC has defined that no change is allowed. Next, you have N, which means no change is allowed, and Virginia has decided that we will reject if this data element is included in the change variable segment. Next, you have K, which means it is a required change and must be reported on a FROI O2. H, which means no change is required, and we will not reject if present. Essentially, what this means is that the Commission does not require an MTC O2 change to be sent. We will allow it, but we do not require it. The majority of these data elements marked with an H mean that they can be updated on any subsequent transaction. Y means that it's a required change on either a FROI or a SROI, but not both. YG means a required change on a FROI or a SROI, but not both, but with an exception. J means required change by transaction type, which essentially means you will change the data element on a SROI if a SROI was previously accepted. If no prior SROI has been accepted, then you will make the change on a FROI O2. And finally, JG. This is required change by transaction type, but with an exception. As you can see here, the change segment has just two data elements. For DN0412, change data element segment number, the claim administrator must identify in the change segment the change data element or segment number of the data that is changing. If the data that is changing is not in a variable segment, you will send the DN for the data element that is changing. If the data that is changing is in a variable segment, you will send the variable segment counter DN. These are the number of data elements. In Release 3.1, a jurisdiction must identify if they want or do not want an O2 change to be sent for each applicable change reason code of add, update, delete, or remove, and they must do so for every data element on both the FROI and SROI. The way they define those requirements is by using the reportable change codes to identify when to send an MTC O2 change and on what transaction, a FROI or a SROI. What you see on your screen is an example from Virginia's FROI requirements. Claim administrators, this is your guide as to whether or not you must send an O2 change and on what transaction you should report it. Now let's discuss the conditions on the MTC O2. The O2 requirement code column will indicate if a DN is F for fatal, uppercase M for mandatory, or lowercase m or MC for match data. There is also an MC mandatory conditional requirement code that is pre-populated by the IA-IABC with a light blue highlight in the O2 requirement code column to support the O2 change process. This light blue MC indicates a standard IA-IABC condition that applies when a data element number is indicated in the change data element segment number and becomes mandatory if the change reason code is either add or update. There is not a separate condition on the Conditions tab for the light blue MCs. When the MC is shaded a light yellow, This is an indication that Virginia has changed the shading from blue to yellow for MC and has added a condition to the Conditions tab for the MTC02. A specific edit will be applied to the Freud or Schroy O2 change. The standard IA-IABC MC condition will still also apply. Here's an example of a completed Schroy change data variable segment from the IA-IABC. The colors are used to help easily identify the different entries in the change variable segment for this slide. There are 6 noted. 5 of the data elements are being added with the change reason code of A, and 1 is being updated with the change reason code of U. You can see here that the 5 DNs being added are not in a variable segment, so their change data element segment number is their actual DN. For the 1 update, it is to the benefits variable segment. So the DN number set in the change data element segment number field is the DN number for the variable segment counter of number of benefits, which is DN0288. Let's now discuss the Freud and Schroy O2 exceptions tab in the element requirement table. This tab provides information that describes when there is an exception to when an O2 report should be triggered for a specific change reason code. Exceptions are to be described in the Freud or Schroy O2 exceptions tab for all reportable change codes ending with a G. Here you can see a YG in the add and update column for the benefit segment. Here's an example from Virginia's Schroy O2 exceptions tab. The example is an exception for adding a benefit segment. Normally, a benefit segment would be added with an MTC like an IP, EP, RB, ER, etc., and is not added with an MTC02 change. However, this is an exception. An MTC02 may be sent to add a benefit segment if reporting a benefit for a past period. An example would be a previous period that was due but not yet reported or mistakenly dropped from the transaction. A past period is defined as the benefit period through date of the past benefit being added is less than the greatest benefit period through date previously reported. Note, when a past period of benefit type code 070 is being introduced, reduced earnings will not be present on the transaction. For additional information, please refer to the Release 3.1 limitations known to date in the O2 change rules. Continuing with the MTC02, let's discuss the O2 groups. As I previously mentioned, when the MC is shaded in a light yellow, this is an indication that Virginia has changed the shading from blue to yellow for the MC and has added a condition to the Conditions tab for the MTC02. The groups for data elements were set up because there is a relationship for the data elements in the group. Virginia has grouped several DNs together for the purposes of adding the O2 changes. These group data elements at the bottom of the ERT Conditions tab identify all of the DNs that are to be present on the O2 transaction if one of them is being changed as noted in the condition. The MTC column distinguishes the conditions for the MTC02 only, and where applicable, also indicates the group number. The example you are seeing illustrates the Schroy O2 Group 1 for initial return to work date and initial return to work type code. For initial return to work date, the technical condition indicates that if Schroy MTC equals O2, the change reason code equals A or U, and this is a non-legacy claim, then initial return to work date is required to be present on the O2 transaction whenever the change data element segment number equals 0403 for initial return to work type code. So if you are changing any of the data elements in the group, they all must be present on the O2 transaction. These grouping conditions on the ERT do not say they must be present in the change segment itself, just on the transaction. The grouping edits that address what must be present in the change segment for a group can be found on the edit matrix. To continue our requirements overview, we will move on to Virginia's edit matrix. You may be wondering what other edits will be applied to the EDI data. Well, the edit matrix will provide answers to that question. In addition to the requirements previously discussed in the element requirement table, specifically the conditions edits, the Virginia Edit Matrix defines the valid code values that Virginia will accept, their match data that will be used to match transactions, the edits that will be applied to the EDI data, and it provides the standard error messages associated with these edits. It conveys the specific edit that will be applied to each data element and provides the standard error messages associated with these edits. The spreadsheet is very important for understanding and correcting errors. It is very detailed because it provides the standard errors applied as defined by the IABC standards and also additional edits that are applied specifically for Virginia requirements. Shown here are the tables that are located in the edit matrix. You should be familiar with most of these tables from Release 3.0. There are 9 tables in total that Virginia uses to communicate their edits. The first is the IABC changelog, which is a summary of the changes made by the IABC. The Virginia changelog, which contains a summary of all the changes to the VWC edit matrix from one version to another. The DN error message, which contains standard editing developed for Release 3.1 data elements and any Virginia-specific edits. The value table shows you the codes that Virginia will accept for all of the DNs that have code values assigned by the IABC. Valid value table detail page 1 and 2 are 2 additional tables that provide another version of the value table showing the code values and definitions and what Virginia accepts. This is a helpful tool to print out for quick reference. We also have the match data table. This table provides a list of the data elements that are used to determine if there is a claim on file. The result is for Virginia to use this to determine if the incoming FROI report will create a new claim. Also used to find an existing claim or transaction for processing of other incoming FROI and SHOR reports. The Populations Restrictions table has all of Virginia restriction edits that are applied to the applicable data elements. The Legacy Claim Definitions tab defines a legacy claim and non-legacy claim as it applies to our editing. The sequencing table that contains MTC types with the clarification of what should precede the current MTC being filed. It is important to understand how to interpret the edit matrix table because it can help you figure out the reason why you received an error. All data elements on the FROI and SHROI have a 4-digit DN data number that is used to identify the data element on an acknowledgement. Every error also has an error number. The DN number and error number combinations are present on the acknowledgement and can be used to find the error in this DN error table or on the Populations Restrictions tab, which further explains more complex edits. This is an example of the DN error message tab. A new addition to the DN error tab is the O2 group column. This column advises you if the DN is in a grouping edit and the group edit number. The details of the grouping edits can be found in the Populations Restrictions tab under DN 0412. The group number is in yellow. Here is a sample of the Population Restrictions tab of the Edit Matrix. The Populations Restrictions tab contains the DN number, the reporter MTC, the data element name, exception, error message number, the error message text, which is the IABC description, and the element error text, which is the VWC description. As I mentioned previously, it is important to understand how to use the edit matrix table to help you figure out the reason why you received an error. The acknowledgement should provide you with the following information to help you resolve your errors: the element number, the element error number, the variable segment number, and the element error text. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, the acknowledgement showed the following: element number 0003, which is for the MTC date, the element error number 064, which is for invalid data relationship, variable segment number 00, An element error text must be greater than or equal to the last MTC date in a TA/TE acknowledgement. If you see that your file rejected because of DN0003 for 64 invalid data relationship, you would open the Populations Restrictions tab and go down to DN0003 and then look in the error column for the error text 064, and you can read the full populations restriction edit that says it must be greater than or equal to the last MTC date in a TA or TE status. This will let you know that your MTC date, which should be the date you triggered the report, was not greater than or equal to the last MTC date accepted. If you correct the MTC date and resend, this error should be resolved. The element error text is essential for trying to understand the edit within 50 characters. Please ensure you are receiving this information when you receive your errors. As you can tell from this one, you have to get creative to get the message across in 50 characters. So punctuation is often left off and abbreviations are used. Let's take a look at another example. The acknowledgement should provide you with the following information: element number, which is DN0088 for benefit period start date, element error number 064 invalid data relationship, variable segment number 02, element error text must be greater than or equal to initial disability begin if BTC not equal to permanent partial. The error for DN0088 is in variable segment 2, the second benefit segment sent. The error says that there was an invalid data relationship. However, that information isn't clear enough to explain what's wrong. So you look at the element error text for further clarification. Must be greater than or equal to initial disability begin if BTC not equal to perm partial. When you open the Populations Restriction tab and look at DN0088 with error 64, you will see the full description of the edit, which states must be greater than or equal to DN0056 initial date disability began when DN0085 benefit type code is not equal to 030, 230, 530, 040, 540, 090, or 590. This means that the benefit type in segment 2 shouldn't be for permanent partial, and the benefit period start date must be greater than or equal to the initial date disability began that was reported. So in order to fix this error, the benefit period start date may not actually be the data element in error. You must also check the initial date disability began to determine which one needs to be corrected. You should bookmark this table and use it daily to help you resolve your errors. And our final document overview will be for Virginia's sequencing table. With Release 3.1, Virginia will be transitioning to a new sequencing table. On the screen is an example showing a full view of the Freud sequencing table. You may be asking what the purpose is of the sequencing table. The sequencing table provides guidelines to promote standard sequencing edits for trading partners across all jurisdictions. It also provides a tool for jurisdictions to elaborate on standard error messages related to a transaction sequencing. When this table is used with the jurisdiction event table, the sequence of reporting requirements can be determined. Failure of sequencing edits will result in a rejection of the transaction using error message 063 for invalid event sequence. For additional sequencing information, please refer to Section 4 of the Release 3.1 Implementation Guide. Next on your screen is a full view example of the Freud sequencing table. Let's talk about how the sequencing table will work. There are three main sections on the sequencing table that communicate Virginia's sequencing requirements. The Consider MTC and Sequence section. This indicates if the MTC should be considered as the last accepted MTC for sequencing. C equals consider, and X equals do not consider. Since Virginia is transitioning from Release 3 to 3.1, there are Release 3 MTCs that must be considered for sequencing of the next transaction. Next is the MTC accepted for sequencing row. Virginia has indicated either yes, which is Y, or N, which is no, if they will accept the MTC in Release 3.1. Next is the sequencing exception edits table, which is a separate tab that will indicate which exception edits will be applied. Refer to the ungrayed values in the columns with the brown boxes. In the MTC accepted for sequencing Y or N section, Virginia has inserted the applicable indicator in the MTC accepted for sequencing column. Y equals MTC accepted and N equals MTC not accepted. So what does the blue shaded or not shaded MTC section refer to? Blue shaded means the IABC defined the MTC as cannot follow. When these MTCs are sent, then the Freud or Shore report will be rejected with the error message 063 for invalid event sequence. Not shaded means an MTC can follow and may be accepted with consideration of sequencing exception edits, which we will review further on the next slide. The next section is the sequencing exception edit table. This table is used to communicate sequencing exception edits that go beyond the typical MTC to MTC edits. Virginia has placed a Y or N indication in the edit applied column. Y means the exception edit will be applied, and N means the exception edit will not be applied. The sequencing exception edit table and sequencing table work together to communicate the exception edits that will be applied. Virginia has graded the associated edit ID value under the Freud or Shroy sequencing exception edit column for those exception edits that have an indication of N on the sequencing exception edit table. The N, along with the grade cell, indicates that the sequencing exception edit will not be applied. We will now that we have concluded this presentation, if you have any questions, please contact the Virginia EDI support team at edi.support@workcomp.virginia.gov. We do ask that you include the subject line 3.1 questions from info session so we can be sure to prioritize your question and respond in a timely manner. Any other Release 3.1 questions or general VWC EDI support questions should also be sent to this email address. If you have questions concerning the trading partner registration process, we ask that you send those to editpinfo@workcomp.virginia.gov. If you feel you need further training on understanding the IABC Release 3.1 format, then the IABC offers EDI Claims Release 3.1 virtual training. This provides a great opportunity for users of the IABC EDI Claims Release 3.1 standard to learn more about the overall standard. You can find further details and registration at iaiabc.org under the Events and Education dropdown, and then under EDI Training. If you need additional Virginia-specific training, we do encourage you to reach out to our EDI support team to request that training. We will be sure to set you up with our EDI training team so we can provide you the training that you and your team need. This concludes our presentation. I would like to take a moment to thank you for reviewing the EDI Claims Release 3.1 information session for Virginia. We hope that this session was beneficial and provided you necessary information to ensure success of implementation of the 3.1 project. If you need assistance, we strongly encourage you to reach out to our EDI support team so that a member of my team can assist you and provide answers to any questions that you may have. Thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.